Hot take, Invincible is good, really good. Groundbreaking stuff I know, but I thought I'd examine the series in a little more depth, breaking down why I think so many people like it. I'll also chuck in some things I personally didn't like, just to keep things interesting. I'm going to be looking at the main 144 issue series, so expect major spoilers if you've not read them, otherwise it's going to be a trip down memory lane. I'm not going to talk about the animated series or the spin-off comic books, and just as a warning, there is a small section about sexual violence later on. We're going to start by having a look at the artwork, because let's be honest, you notice that before the storyline. And I'm a beats over bars kind of guy anyway, so I'm always going to give a series more time if I'm a fan of the artwork, even if I'm not loving the story or the dialogue. Invincible has very aesthetically pleasing artwork. It's very clean and vibrant, with easily recognisable and standout designs. Corey Walker is an excellent draftsman. He made the Invincible look with lots of blocks of solid colour to frame key details. Just look at the page where Mark discovers his powers. Whilst not the first to do this look felt more like a modern artistic take as the millennium started. Although as said I wasn't going to talk about the animated series, the artwork probably went a long way in getting it made. The designs for the characters help set the series apart, with costumes and faces distinct from other superhero comics. Just look at Invincible. Whilst he has a few new designs throughout the series, it never feels derivative of any other comics, to me at least anyway. This may seem like a minor point, but design plays a massive part in getting a comic character going. Do you think Superman would have got where he is today without the iconic costume? Or Nightwing if he wore loose-fitting clothing? What is interesting is that the artist changed really early on. The series started off with Corey Walker illustrating, but he was unable to keep up with the publishing schedule, so was swapped for Ryan Ottley in issue 8. This was an amicable transition, it has to be stressed. Walker continued to offer advice and even work on some issues like the Flaxen storyline. He often helped with designs of characters as well. He has to be recognised as the co-creator of Invincible, designing so much of the world visually, but it's Ottley's art that defines the majority of the run. The transition between the two wasn't hugely noticeable, as both are fairly similar in style, but the dynamic inks from Bill Crabtree no doubt helped with the change. Ottley really grows in the role, and the artwork becomes more ambitious as the series grows. Just look at this scene from Modern Family. Lots of detail, emotion in the figures, and all done from an unusual angle. Clearly he was having a lot of fun being creative with his panels. It was actually his first monthly comic he drew, but you wouldn't know it. Ottley seems to thrive in the graphic violence as well, something the comic will become known for. In his own words, as a kid, he always liked drawing monsters, weird faces and violence. His red crown was always the shortest. The man knows how to draw a splatter. So side note, I'm not a huge fan of the excessive gore, but I know it was really appealing to a lot of people. It really illustrated what it would be like to be hit by someone with super strength. And then of course you have the writer, Robert Kirkman. He's probably been the hottest thing in comics in the last couple of decades, courtesy of not only Invincible, but The Walking Dead's blowing up in popularity. He's also penned a lot of other titles you've probably heard of, like Marvel Zombies and Haunt at Image. Publishing at Image gives the creator more control over their work, and Kirkman remained the writer throughout the series. That continuity with both writing and artwork paid dividends, giving Invincible a clear visual identity, but the scope for small and long overlapping storylines within the writing. There is a clear vision in how the story should start and end, with very few issues or storylines feeling like they are any sort of filler material. That complete story is another key factor in Invincible's initial success. If you picked up issue 1, you were in at the ground floor, you didn't have to know decades of canon, everyone came in equally, making the series really accessible. Whilst continuity is something a lot of people love, it can be a barrier to others as it can feel really overwhelming. At the heart of Invincible's success is the storyline though. Sure, it's not the most complicated, but it rarely, if ever, stops being entertaining. It has a humble start with Mark discovering his powers, handling his first bank robbery, and his first meeting with one of the Mauler twins. This all gradually escalates until Mark is handling bigger and bigger villains and travelling in space, and eventually leading responses to the galaxy-wide threat in the Viltrumites. Along the way there are plenty of twists, turns and cliffhangers, keeping the reader longing for the next issue. You have lots of dramatic 180s in perception of characters, like with Nolan becoming a villain after killing the Guardians of the Globe, only to then rekindle a relationship with Mark on Thraxa. This all keeps you as a reader guessing. I think Kirkamn does a great job with pacing, with just enough time in between explosive action for decompression and reflection, but with the stakes slowly increasing as time goes on. Bank robbers are eventually replaced with world-ending threats. This increasing threat and scope is all part of a well-crafted plot that sees Mark get a happy ending, an ending that is earned and feels appropriate for Mark, a reward too for the reader for their part in the journey. Mark's happy ending was one that saw him have a peaceful and happy life with his daughter and Atom Eve, and they lived happily ever after. This is the hero's reward for the pain and strife that they'd went through. Again, whilst this isn't groundbreaking, and the ending might even seem cliche, it comes across more deserving because Mark's choices got him there. Mark's sacrifices and his pain earned him that happy life. Because this is a series where actions have consequences. Nobody is going to turn back time or whisper a few magic words to undo something. Actions matter in the Invincible universe, for better or for worse. For example, in the Get Smart storyline, Invincible confronts Dinosaurus, who is trying to obliterate Las Vegas. Invincible manages to locate one of the bombs, but Dinosaurus had predicted this and hidden many others that Invincible failed to find. The resulting explosion leaves a plain of glass where the city once stood, the heat from the explosion melting the desert sand. Invincible had actually met Dinosaurus before in issue 68. Dinosaurus had tried to stop Mark rebuilding a city, arguing that the world was a better place without huge polluting cities. Dinosaurus turns into his human form during the resulting fight, and for a second Mark considers killing David Anders before the Guardians of the Globe intervene. Now, if he had killed David there and then Dinosaurus would never have destroyed Las Vegas, a knock-on effect that Mark could not have foreseen. Not too long after the destruction of Las Vegas, Mark visits Anders, who is locked up at the Pentagon. Subverting expectations, Mark breaks him out, deciding that some of his ideas were worth pursuing, if not the method. This action of teaming up sees him build irrigation canals, defeat Omnipotus, plus Dinosaurus rescues Mark from Thrag. But it also sees Dinosaurus kill thousands by flooding cities around the world in an attempt to save billions in his eyes. Mark kills him in the end at Anders' bequest, guilt having overwhelmed Dinosaurus. Another little side note here, I didn't like this ending for Dinosaurus and I think he deserved better. Excluding the likes of Robot, I think few had a more tangible effect on the status quo of the planet than Dinosaurus. Killing thousands if not more with his bombs, wiping a major city off the map, but also coming up with plans for a powerful solar array for cheap energy, having a lasting positive environmental impact, reducing the hardship on future generations of people. But the consequences of his actions could easily have been removed if the creative team changed at any point during this run. Instead, they remain and become a crucial part of forming Mark's character. You could dive into Invincible completely fresh, but conversely, you might find the story very familiar. Mark is in high school when he discovers his powers. He has a small cast of family and friends around him as he navigates his new abilities. It feels like a Spider-Man story, and shortly before the release of Invincible came the rebooted Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man, a series which would prove to be incredibly popular and was a huge part of Marvel's growth since the turn of the millennium. Just read the first paragraph to the synopsis for the first volume of Invincible. This could easily be a Spider-Man story. Both feature young adults in situations that a lot of readers can immediately relate to, whether this was fumbling through romantic relationships, hating his crappy part-time job at Bergamot, or juggling homework around superheroing. These moments help ground Mark. Like his hero name suggests, he is close to being invincible. So these moments of emotional vulnerability or mundanity are vital for keeping Mark relatable. And relatability is something the most popular superhero characters have, and Invincible has it in spades. Mark reads comics for crying out loud. He is made to be loved by his readership. But whilst that family and friends relationship is similar to that you'd find in Spider-Man, The usual hiding it from those close to them is given up for the most part. Obviously Invincible's dad, Omni-Man, knows about Invincible, as does his mum, but Mark starts to confide in other friends as well, like William and his first girlfriend Amber. This shows us a really positive trait in Mark. He's trusting. Whilst there are some notable exceptions, it can be hard to sell a comic where the main character doesn't have some positive attributes. In fact, Mark has many positive characteristics that make him easy to admire. He's courageous, has a strong moral compass, and is compassionate. Like Spider-Man though, he has enough flaws to make him not just be a boring paragon. He makes mistakes, like for example when he kills Angstrom. His decisions aren't always the correct ones, but we can see things from his point of view and how he comes to make those decisions. Again, this helps make him a really compelling and relatable character. What can be frustrating for a lot of fans of other superheroes is the lack of growth for characters, or when they do achieve some, things reverse back with a universe reboot, deal with the devil, or a memory wipe. That can feel like characters make one step forward only to then take two back. This will forever be a talking point for Marvel and DC and their respective continuities, but in a contained universe with a small creative team, these things are not a concern. Whilst we've spoken briefly about Mark's plotline and his happy ending, it all came about due to his character growth. We were able to see him grow from a young adult into a man, becoming a loving husband and father. This transformation was marked with key events like looking after his half-brother Oliver, fighting Omni-Man, maintaining a relationship with Eve after months away. All of these moments, along with many more, are key to forming Mark as an adult. This is very similar to Kirkman's approach to actions having consequences. As readers, we want to see events have an impact on characters, as it raises the stakes and increases believability. Which obviously take a pinch of salt with, because this is a world that contains the Lizard League. Of course, Mark's growth wasn't confined to just things he acquired like a wife and a child. We also got to see how his personality and view of the world developed. He starts as a very headstrong young man with a black and white view of the world. You punch bad people, they get punished for what they do, and they go to prison. This is the superhero way. However, Mark's experiences in the real world alter this view ever so slowly over the course of the series. His interactions with fellow heroes and villains broadened his perspective, for better or for worse. Working with Cecil Stedman at the Global Defense Agency, he learns that not everyone gets the justice he expected. Even villains he personally stopped, like D.A. Sinclair, genius scientist albeit with few morals, creator of the Reanimen, who instead of being imprisoned for his crimes, is instead put to work under Stedman. Stedman sees an opportunity to look past his previous actions and gain some good from Sinclair's intellect, and his Reanimen continue to make many appearances in future issues. It's encounters like this and seeing the change in his father that help shape Mark and help him see the world in shades of grey. Without these experiences, he would never have worked with Dinosaurus. It gives him the conviction to stand up to his brother's stronger views on justice, which we'll look at a bit later. I think this is a really good spot to mention the extended cast of this story as well, because what Kirkman does wonderfully well is ensure that it's not only the main character who develops, but also everyone else in the story. There are plenty of excellent side characters we could discuss here, whether it's Rexplode, Oliver, Monster Girl, Duplicate, but I just want to focus on two. The first of which I suspect might be the second most popular character in the series, Alan. The first encounter between Mark and Alan is in space, where the two fight and Alan is there to challenge the planet's champion. It's all very farcical, as it turns out that Alan had been at the wrong planet for years. When reading it, I did not expect this comic relief type character to end up as leader of the coalition of planets in charge of the campaign to rid the galaxy of the Viltrumites. His story was not an easy one. Born in a breeding camp, he was the only Unopan to get through the experimentation process and become a potential weapon in the fight against the Viltrumites. Alan's first encounter with the Viltrumites ended with him easily defeated and beaten very close to death. His subsequent revival and revitalization in a stasis chamber was his body's response to the beating. He became as strong as a Viltrumite. But like Mark, he's a character of developing views. He was able to befriend Nolan on the Viltrumite prison ship. As the Great Alan, he leads an assault on Viltrum and helps defend Earth in the final showdown in the end of all things. The development of both Alan and Mark is actually what makes them drift apart, with Mark acknowledging that responsibility gets in the way of their friendship. As leader, Alan had to make difficult decisions and sacrifices for the good of his people. And the other character I really want to mention is Debbie Grayson, Mark's mother. She went through a lot. She spent her marriage not knowing whether her husband Omni-Man would be coming home, accepting that saving the world would be his priority. She knew it would be the same watching her son develop his powers, knowing that he would want to follow in his father's footsteps. It takes an incredible fortitude to accept this as your life. Now imagine the pain and hurt it would take to make a woman like Debbie crumble. How about if you found your husband was planning to enslave the human race, making it part of the Viltrum Empire, and that your husband Nolan was using you as a disguise to help blend in with humans, a pet, and that on being discovered, Omni-Man near beats your son to death and wipes out thousands of people in the process before fleeing the planet. That is the sort of thing that it takes to break Debbie Grayson. Unsurprisingly, these revelations cause her to spiral, hitting the bottle. But it doesn't stop, as she finds out that Nolan is not only alive and well, but has had a son with another woman. Despite no biological relationship, and I really mean that, Oliver is not even part human. Debbie takes him in and cares for him as if he were one of her own, even naming him after her father. Imagine then the kind of woman to take Nolan back, and that's what Debbie does. She finds it in her heart to forgive Nolan, becoming a couple with him once again. I think Debbie has the toughest story with her world being absolutely shattered. Unlike Mark, she does not have the physical strength to deal with her problems like he does. It takes a while, but it's her mental strength that helps her on her journey back from the brink. It's to Kirkman's credit, you can isolate almost any character in the series and find a really interesting story that sees them develop. All these characters feed into Kirkman's world building. I like to think the world building in Invincible is similar to the artwork of Corey Walker in those first issues. The key bits are detailed and focused, but it's up to the reader to fill in those background details. And that's not a criticism. For this series, it makes sense to have a light touch and just be given the broad strokes. There are some really nice ways Kirkman develops the universe and tells us about it. Like we're exposed to some of the almost myths and legends through Nolan's sci-fi stories, and I think is a really cool way to introduce us to characters like Space Rider, creating a bit of a mystery around them. We see glimpses of other cultures too, but nothing too involved. But generally, we don't need to know the complexities of how these alien societies organise themselves or interact with one another. We don't need to know how fast a Viltrumite can fly or what the tax system was on Unopin. I'll try not to repeat too much here, but I want to raise how brilliantly Kirkman plans his story arcs. You can see it with the character arcs as well as the plot lines. The series was certainly written with trade paperbacks in mind, with many story arcs typically lasting about 6 issues or so. What makes Invincible great, however, is how some of the plot lines just simmer in the background until coming to the fore when you'd least suspect it. The best example I can think of starts with the Flaxans. Remember them? The funny green soldiers invaded Earth back in issue 3 before being confronted by Mark and Nolan. The invasion backfired as the soldiers age rapidly in this dimension. The Flaxans try again and again though, each time becoming harder to beat as they have time on their side in their dimension to plan and adapt. These invasions keep happening until issue 71 when Robot decides that the only way to defeat them permanently is to follow them back to their dimension. He and Monster Girl jump through the portal back to the Flaxan homeworld. Robot and Monster Girl do return to the main dimension, but it's a long time before we as readers discover what happened. We see a strange relationship between the two, but we don't really start to find out what happened until issue 92. Robot and Monster Girl had returned by then, having been gone for around a year. Robot had told Cecil that they think they'd experienced about 12 years away, however we discover later on that it had actually been 700 years, and in that time a lot had occurred for the pair. imprisonment, Monster Girl forced into a fighting pit, the pair then lead a slave rebellion, taking decades to overthrow the system, before Rudy is finally in charge. Rudy becomes obsessed with control, ignoring his relationship with Monster Girl and persecuting the former royalist opposition, the Zaxels. Monster Girl eventually helps them overthrow Rudy, imprisoning him. Years pass and Monster Girl finds out the Zaxels are mounting another attack on Earth and breaks out Rudy, who once again becomes leader of the resistance. He regains his position as leader of the Flaxlands after once again toppling the Zaxel regime. He and Monster Girl decide to return to Earth, with Rudy stating the Flaxlands no longer need them. He does this just after ordering the execution of any remaining Zaxels without the knowledge of Monster Girl. Now that's a whirlwind of info there, but you have to remember that happened over 700 years. The main point being that Rudy was in charge, not just of a team, but of a people, a civilization. And he liked it. Once you add in his background of feeling inadequate, being told that he was not performing as leader of the Guardians, then his eventual reveal as a big bad makes sense. Invincible ends with Robot taking over the entire Earth, having killed Cecil and gaining the support of a few heroes before being stopped by Invincible and some other rebels. Again, this is why I think Invincible is great. We had a story arc that was there just under the surface the whole time, just out of reach. It was only with the series coming to an end that Kirkamn showed us how significant the arrival of the Flaxlands back in issue 3 would be. You can find this with quite a few of the other different plot lines, as Kirkamn likes to daisy chain plots together with overlapping points, rather than completely separate arcs. This rewards not only long-time readers, but encourages newer readers to go back and read issues they'd missed. There are obviously arcs I'm not so keen on, like I feel the Titan storyline never felt that relevant, but there are so many other fun ones like the Sequids that more than make up for those. Now, I'm fully prepared to be shot down in the comments here, but I don't think there's too many themes or deeper meanings within the series, except for one main one. So I'm not going to be talking about basic things like relationships and family and trust and things like that. But what we do see is the idea that people deserve a second chance. We see it time and time again, with Omni-Man, Dinosaurus, D.A. Sinclair, the Viltrumites and so on. This is Kirkamn holding a mirror up to the typical comic book stories that punching followed by imprisonment doesn't work. Similarly, there is a repeated conflict about whether killing villains to stop future crimes or save lives is justifiable. In fact, Oliver and Mark sit on different sides of this debate. Although Mark is not convinced of his own arguments, executing criminals makes them, as in the heroes, the law, and they're not infallible. This conflicts with second chances, as there's no second chances to redeem oneself after death. So I've mentioned there's a lot of redemptive arcs in the series, but I think there's a couple that really miss the mark, no pun intended. Firstly, Gary getting a pass over domestic violence to Amber, Mark's ex, was pretty unforgivable. It felt more like a story about showing Mark's restraint rather than any real justice or consideration for Amber, let alone ensuring that she had a safe future. I'm not saying that Mark should have beaten up the guy, but Gary should have faced charges for it. It could have been a much more interesting storyline if Gary got arrested but the case was dropped against him due to something like a lack of evidence. This could have created a shake of faith in law and order for Mark. On a similar note, we should talk about the story behind Mark's child. No, not Terra, but Marky. So cue a trigger warning here as we're covering the rape of Mark by the Viltrumite Anissa. Anissa rapes Mark in an attempt to continue the Viltrumite line, resulting in the birth of Marcus. The story of redemption here being that Anissa assimilates into the human world, falling in love, raising children and defending the planet from Thrag and his child army. Even Eve forgives her in the end, seeing her as a changed woman, and her hero's death feels like as a reader we should too. Where I have a real issue with it is the execution. For some reason, there was a creative decision to really explore the rape sequence in detail. Pages are dedicated to the struggle between Anissa and Mark before we are hit with a 21 panel breakdown on one page of the actual assault, with a deliberate focus on the physicality of both parties in titillating detail. I get that it's an important message to highlight that men can be sexually assaulted or abused, but this felt more like living out a fantasy for someone in the team, a really uncomfortable read. Again though, justice isn't sought against Anissa, and as mentioned earlier, she instead finds her redemption through assimilating with humanity, despite the psychological damage it had on Mark, but she lives to die a hero's death, saving Eve, but not regretting her actions. Just to clarify, I'm not thrilled by the plotline at all, but it's the actual rape scene that I have an issue with. It's a subject that's almost never handled well in any media, but this was far from done well here. Rant over. I don't think Kirkamn ever satisfactorily answers this question about proportionate justice. However, I don't think this is that kind of series and doesn't have to. At the end of the day, this is about Invincible having adventures and saving the day, and that is enough. Because Invincible is fun. There are lots of great lines and jokes, plus lots of Easter eggs and pop culture parodies. It's no surprise you'll have references to The Walking Dead in there, but you'll also find nods to Superman and Star Trek. Check out the Next Generation crew making an appearance here. There are also in-jokes like the appearance of Bulletproof, who eventually takes up the mantle and costume of Invincible. Bulletproof had been the original title for Mark in the series, but was changed due to another series, Bulletproof Monk, also being published by Image. There are also wry smile jokes as Kirkamn plays to comic tropes, having the heroes fight each other when they meet, or having the exotic redhead as the love interest. The comic book parodies come from a place of love, which helps to not alienate any readers too. Throw in some meta jokes with Mark talking to the creator of Science Dog, and you've got some great lines that work even on a reread. It might take a reread or two for you to notice some of the visual gags, like the trust me pose being used multiple times. Then you have really simple puns like naming a character who can make copies of herself, duplicate, then doubling down on it by making her brother Multi-Paul. It's brilliant. And that's the essence of the series, to me at least. I think all those reasons I've outlined are why it's so popular. No, it's not Mouse or Watchmen, but it's not trying to be. It's good, fun, exciting read that got a ton of people into comics. It's Kirkman's love letter to the superhero comic, but at the same time trying to address some of the issues readers have with them. I'll be interested to see whether its popularity remains once the animated series finishes. Unless Kirkamn continues adding spin-off comic series, it might just fizzle out, but who knows. I thought I'd end on a couple of points just to hammer home how unlikely Invincible was to be a success, let alone the mammoth series it became. Firstly, vendors didn't pick up the series in huge numbers at all. And secondly, Invincible was part of Image's new line of superheroes that was supposed to kick off a shared universe. Dominion, Fire Breather, Clockmaker, and Venture. Now which of those do you know? Let me know what you think below, and let me know if you want me to look at any of the spin-off series in a future episode. Thanks for watching.